Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another presentation from the Barry Flinchbaugh Center for Ag and Food Policy. This is a monthly podcast called Clearing the Air on Agricultural Policy. It is a complement to the weekly podcast known as Smoke and Mirrors, Ag Policy Unfiltered, out of Kansas State University. I'll be your moderator for this conversation, Eric Atkinson from K-State. It's our pleasure this time around to bring into the discussion the leader of an ag policy center that we're told has a unique approach to its business, and we'll tell you more about him shortly. First, to introduce to you our panel for this month, the regular gang sharing their thoughts with us today. Joining us a little later will be Associate Extension Professor and Agricultural and Public Policy Specialist out of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Brad Lubin, and Professor Emeritus and longtime agricultural and rural policy specialist out of Iowa State University, Mark Edelman. Also with us is a professor and extension specialist and the Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair at Kansas State University, Jenny Ift, and she is also the producer of that weekly podcast, Smoke and Mirrors, Ag Policy Unfiltered. We're glad to have all of them joining us today, as usual. Our special guest today is Chris Boomsma. Chris is the CEO of the Council for Agricultural Science and Technology, if you prefer acronyms, CAST for short. In this role, he leads CAST in fulfilling its mission to assemble, to interpret, and to communicate credible, science-based information regionally, nationally, and internationally, this to legislators, to regulators, to the media, to the private sector, and of course to the public. Prior to joining CAST, Chris was the Director of Education for the American Society of Agronomy, the Crop Science Society of America, and the Soil Science Society of America. He was the Director of Science and Strategy for Decode 6. I'll have him explain what that outfit is all about, perhaps a little later on. And he previously served in other leadership roles, research and product development roles specifically at Purdue University and at Dow AgroSciences. Chris earned his bachelor's degree in plant science from Dordt University and his PhD in crop physiology and agronomy from Purdue University. Welcome, Chris, and we'll turn it on over to Jenny now to get the conversation rolling. Jenny?
All right. Well, hi, Chris. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to get us started on sort of some background. Do you mind first telling us about the history of CAST?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's my privilege to be here today. Thanks for having me on the show. A little bit about CAST itself. Yeah, as stated earlier, we're the Council for Agricultural Science and Technology, a nonprofit organization headquartered in Ames, Iowa, in the Iowa State University Research Park. We were formed over 50 years ago in the early 1970s by Dr. Norman Borlaug and others who thought, rightfully so, that it's very important to communicate the value and importance of agricultural science and technology to, in particular, the policymaking community. That mission carries on to this day. It does so with a number of staff here at our place in Iowa, but also with a huge host of volunteers that work with us, lots of subject matter experts spanning the animal, plant, and food domains. That's a little bit about CAST, and I'm happy to tell you more as you need, Jenny.
I guess a good way to kick it off might be to tell us about the major activities that CAST engages in today.
So CAST has been and continues to issue papers, webinars, and a variety of other education activities on the most pressing issues in agricultural science and technology. So think of maybe a key issue or a key recent technology in science, such as genome editing, RNA interference technology, maybe a piece of regulation that needs talking about. Or if we turn to, let's say, the animal side of things, avian influenza, New World screwworm, all those types of things are issues that we talk about, write about, using our experts with academy level rigor, and then we bring that to those audiences that really need to learn about it. We don't advocate, we don't lobby, we educate and inform. And so we do bring these messages often to Washington, D.C., where we host events there, but also other places in the country. And those could be across a variety of states. And there we bring in our experts in addition to staff to make sure that folks are highly, highly informed. Those who are making critical decisions in particular are highly informed about these issues so they can make science-based decisions as appropriate. It's our chief work that we do, right?
And in terms of the sort of backers or membership of CAST, I assume it's people working in research, but how far does it extend beyond?
That's a great question. Great question. So CAST gets a lot of its support financially and from volunteers too, from all over the ag science and technology industry and beyond that. We actually derive much of our income from memberships, whether it's individuals who are passionate about CAST and want to participate, or it's organizations. Those organizations can be scientific societies, universities, they may be nonprofits, commodity organizations, companies, whether small, like startups, or large corporations. That's where we derive a lot of our work from. Now, we do sometimes apply for grants and get those too from various places. But most of the time, we're a membership-driven organization. And it's those members that really keep the lights on and keep the things turning here, whether through how we work and what we do, or for how we're financially supported.
That's terrific. Can you do a deeper dive on one of the current things you're working on?
Yeah. Well, we're working on a lot right now, but I'll tell you, one of the key things, which I don't think will come to a surprise to our listeners, is AI. Truly, we've got a pretty big project to run that right now. We have 3 work groups: animal, plant, and food, which work in their respective domains, really talking about science, technology, regulation, and critical issues in each of those areas. All 3 are working on AI. We have a paper already issued on AI in agriculture. We're working on a policy brief, and we're working on events in DC. AI is transforming this industry, frankly, like it does so many. And we want to make sure that any decisions that are made around it are made, with science in mind, and that people see both the opportunities and the challenges for that technology in this industry and the far-reaching implications of it, including across, like I said, animal, plant, and food. That's one example of something we're working on. And there's certainly many other topics we're tackling at this moment.
Chris, on the mechanics of how you would approach something like AI, which is so fast-moving, so far-flung, just how do you lock down into pursuing more in the way of AI information for your purposes?
Yeah. So for our purposes here, when we talk about the products we're producing, the educational resources, they first come out really from our work groups. And people who are working at the forefront of these things say, look, these are the technologies, these are the issues we should be talking about. And what happens is it progresses through the work group where it gets approval and then goes to the board of directors for approval. And then our volunteer network starts tackling it. So it's not like we just choose sporadically topics of choice. We first basically try to take the issue from a holistic perspective, which is what we've done with the paper that's already issued and you can find on our website. And then we try to break it down into other pieces, like a policy brief, like webinars and the like. And then we try to get more specific around that issue. What are the hottest issues in animal, plant, and food that are going to be impacted by AI? So we get more granular with time and we dig deeper into the science and technology so that that sort of umbrella topic is covered. And then we get specific into particular issues that are of concern to particular communities in agriculture. That's how we address it mainly.
Chris, as we've watched CAST work on helping society at large and policymakers maybe in specific understand the scientific basis or the scientific knowledge contributed to these issues, how has CAST dealt with the reality that science may inform the debate, but it doesn't necessarily answer the questions or it doesn't resolve the ongoing dispute? How does CAST live and operate in that world?
Yeah, that's something we always ask ourselves. How can we have more reach? How can we have more impact? While, of course, staying true to our mission, which is educating and informing our audiences. What we always say, first of all, is everything we do is grounded in the science, and it's always unbiased, and it's always nonpartisan. That's something we don't compromise on, and we never will. That's true to the mission of CAST. So we put up those guardrails, and we say, okay, this is where we're going. We're going to keep academy-level rigor. These things are going to be reviewed. They're going to come from experts. And that's just how we're going to roll with it. Now, how do we inform the debate more? By being present more often, by being very, very timely in our communication, by becoming a trusted resource. And that's what's happened over the last 50 years. Now that audience changes. People rotate in and out of government and the like. But we've built up a good reputation and we try to keep those consistent relationships going. CAST, while we say, and it's true, we do want to reach the public. We do want to reach the media. But we want to do so in ways that are healthy, while at first and foremost, reaching those key audiences around policymakers, decision makers, and the like. We can't be everything to everybody. There are other organizations out there that have a broader reach into the public and sort of informing that debate. We have a very specific audience with the executive branch, the legislative branch, the state governments and the like. And that's where we really try to educate and inform and maintain those connections and be a trusted resource for them that they can rely upon to give them that key science information they need. So I think part of it is just staying true to your audience, not being everything to everybody, while at the same time putting out resources that the broader public and media can consume and hopefully find very, very helpful. Yeah, it's hard to know though exactly the impact and measure it. We do that in various ways, but it's always something we're working on and getting better at, no doubt.
Well, and I think that's a broader question that all of higher academia faces, is trying to understand the role of information and trying to understand how to communicate that effectively. I'm reminded of a piece I know that Cass produced some years ago, a nice brief one-page sort of infographic of what biotechnology means. And the original biotech engineering was crossbreeding. And there was the mutagenesis and radiation-led efforts. And then we're into gene editing now. But even the more you explain those different methods and scientific processes and so forth, does that inform and resolve the debate, or does that actually make some of the debate even more complex?
Yeah.
Like, does science information help, or does it actually just extend the discussion?
I would hope both. I hope it keeps a conversation going and informs it with the science that we think is the leading science out there that comes from some of the leading experts in that space. I don't think Cass has any illusion that it's going to come in, issue a paper and say, issue resolved, everybody. We just want to be there as a trusted resource, showcasing the excellent science that's been done and the technologies that are out there that can guide us through some of the issues we face in agriculture. If we can do that, that's great. Now, you mentioned infographics. We not only have papers, we do infographics, we do podcasting, videos, and the like. We try to meet our various audiences where they are with the information they need at the level that they need it at. Not everybody needs it super granular. Not everybody wants that. A congressional staffer may want it more granular. A person in the media just needs a high-level sort of explanation. We meet them where they are with the time that they have and hopefully provide the resources that help fulfill their work and their mission.
Question I was going to ask, to what extent and how do you involve social scientists in your process, and like economics and sociology and others?
That's a great question. Yeah.
They're sort of community-based or multidimensional objectives that are not quite as cannot be narrowly defined, that all policymakers will accept. I mean, we get a bell curve on what the solutions or proposals are and where people are at in terms of policy popularity. How do you work that in, if at all, to what a CAST report would do?
Absolutely. Well, I do think to some extent it is topic specific, but it certainly is an important aspect of broader topics. And let me give you an example. If we were talking about RNA interference technology and what the technology can do for, let's say, the biotech community, that's probably not going to weave in the social piece. That was a paper a couple of years ago. Our more recent paper that we put out was heavy on the social aspect of the topic, and that was diversification of the U.S. Corn Belt. There is a heavy economic and social component to that, which at CAST, we like to leverage the social sciences, economics, and not just those hardcore science sort of areas to answer these really, really tough questions. I like to say that if we're covering a broad topic that has social implications, you not only talk about the science and the technology, you talk about potentially the environmental components, the economic component, and the social component. Because on these bigger, broader topics, if you haven't addressed all of them, you really haven't done that difficult topic enough justice. You just haven't. And you haven't given the full perspective that our audience needs to hear. And so CAST does indeed bring in the social component as necessary and needed based on the topic. Now, can I see that happening around AI, a topic I mentioned earlier? Absolutely. It could. It's going to be a tough question. We already are thinking about in some of these papers, what are the implications of data centers? And if you talk about data centers and you don't think about the social component, you haven't thought about it holistically and what it could mean for rural communities, for example. So it's incumbent upon CAST to bring the social piece in at the appropriate time.
With respect to that then, Chris, say take something very generic and broadly understood like the Farm Bill. Which is laden with social as well as scientific variables. How do you make that balance, and how do you make sure that the message that you're trying to share concerning any aspect of, say, the Farm Bill is what you want to get out with the proper balance?
Good question. In full transparency, we don't dive with our work too much into the Farm Bill. We will report on what's happening with it. We don't try to, you might say, advocate or lobby for specific pieces of it. We try to stay very close to our 501c3 mission. Now, if we can provide resources that help decision makers when they're basically going through the Farm Bill and need input on a particular matter from our perspective, which is science, technology, economics, or social component, we will do that. And we can. We just try to make sure that they're aware of our resources as they go through that process. We think that, work on the Farm Bill, at least where CAST stands today with its mission, is best done by some of our stakeholders, our members, our collaborators, our affiliates. If we can give them the resources that they need to go through that process, all the better. That doesn't mean we don't work with House and Senate Ag committees or with the legislative branch in general. They're aware of us. It's just other entities weigh in more a bit than we do. We, again, stay true to our mission.
One of the things that's sort of a core philosophy of the mission of the Flinchbaugh Center is to utilize the methods, the public policy education methods that our namesake, Barry Flinchbaugh, used from the 1970s up through his career at 2020. And he was involved with several Farm Bill discussions, most notably probably the 21st Century Production Ag Commission that was part of the 1996 Farm Bill and the Freedom to Farm concept. As part of that mission, we espouse to explore informational kinds of things like you mentioned, where we are seeking to inform about something that's new and emerging. And at the same time, when we get to policy education, are focused on outlining alternatives and probable consequences. And so we don't advocate for particular solutions, but during any Farm Bill debate, we have emergence of various new concepts, and there's always continuation of existing concepts. But there's alternatives in the Farm Bill, and gee whiz, there's a dozen different titles in the Farm Bill that gets passed. But we usually use an alternatives and consequences approach in conducting policy education programs, which is a little bit different. But I could see each alternative maybe having a component back to what's the science behind this particular alternative, or what are the implications of this particular alternative?
Yeah.
Do you get involved in or would CAST get involved in that kind of an educational effort?
Yeah, I would say that is the case. Take, for example, what I just mentioned with the diversification of the U.S. Corn Belt, just talking about what could be. It certainly presents some alternatives, right? And so the experts who wrote that paper, the volunteers who did, lay out those very things. This is what could happen. It does touch on the policy piece. This is what the Corn Belt could potentially look like, and this is what it would take to potentially get there. I think if you're approaching an issue properly, the right issue, yeah, you could do that very thing. And I like those principles that you talked about. It gives me something to think about for CAST 2 and how we do these things. I'll say, too, when it comes to the Farm Bill, too, obviously, like I said, we're there to educate and inform. Remember where our members come from, and even our volunteers. They, too, have their individual efforts that they're doing to inform the Farm Bill. And so if we, work through them, they're aware of our resources, and if they're utilizing them, great. They'll tap us on the shoulder if they need us to produce something. So we just try to stay in our lane appropriately and execute our mission and just not be everything to everybody. Because again, we have so many great member organizations, part of us, that are already leaning into this. Now, what we try to do and what we're looking to build here as we grow CAST, and we're talking about it now, we're using this title loosely, to become a National Academy of Agriculture. Again, loose, I'm not saying that that's what we're going to settle on, or if we don't necessarily have a tie there to the national academies per se, but that is looking at having a broader mission and truly bringing together in a big tent approach, a broader coalition of stakeholders in agricultural science and technology building a unified voice that together, again, educates and informs and maybe goes beyond that, will help set strategic direction for agricultural science and technology in the US and beyond. That's a broadening of the mission and getting closer to what we're talking about here, maybe informing the Farm Bill in different ways and thinking more broadly, even still on topics. But that's the future, and that's what we're starting to talk about here as we get into the second half of this year in preparation for 2027.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to some of the first policy education programs that the ag economics profession and extension policy educators in the 70s worked on were topics like who will control U.S. agriculture, sort of a flashy title, but they looked at different alternative ways of organizing institutions in agricultural policy focused on a dispersed system, a cooperative system, a corporate system, and a government-managed system. And that's kind of an example of Barry was involved in doing that kind of a program. And that's kind of an example of perhaps how policy educators in extension and land-grant universities could potentially work with CAST fairly effectively, in my opinion. I'm stepping over on the advocacy side there, but I think that could work to a certain extent, because you need to marry the social sciences on particular kinds of programs. If you're educating the public, you need to kind of marry the approach that social scientists use with a grounded understanding of the hard scientists and the physical scientists of how things actually work in biological processes and climate processes and a number of areas. It's multidimensional, in my view.
Yeah. Well, you're right. You know, what you bring up from the 70s there is in large part what we're thinking here now in the 2020s is, what does our agricultural system need to look like? And what does the science and technology behind that need to look like that supports that? And the realization we've come to is that, agriculture right now is going through some pretty strong structural change. And a deep understanding and evaluation of where we are and where we want to go needs to happen. And like you say, and like I've been saying as I go out and talk to folks about this National Academy approach, it does require a big tent, and that includes all of the sciences. Because if you're not thinking across those sciences, just not the core sciences, the physical, the chemical, the agricultural, but if you're not thinking about the economics and the social, it's not going to work. It's part and parcel to what the structural evaluation requires. And I think here at CAST, we're committed to that. That's what we're telling folks as we go out, is we're committed to this big tent, broad approach, and we're calling it multi-sector and multi-domain. Sector you might think of, the private sector, the public sector, etc. When you think of the domain, you think about all those sciences and all those other areas that I mentioned earlier. It has to encapsulate all of that, or it's just not going to present the picture and the foresight and the guidance that we need to provide. So your comments are very appropriate, and I appreciate them.
The 2026 Flinchbaugh Forum is coming up September the 3rd and the 4th in Manhattan, Kansas. In response to positive feedback from our inaugural forum last year, 2026 features a new format, 2 days of straight-talk conversations on the policies, markets, and decisions shaping the future of food and agriculture. You'll hear from national leaders, industry experts, and the people driving real change across the ag economy. Registration is open now and filling up fast. Register by July the 6th and receive 20% off of your registration. Save your seat at www.flinchbaughcenter.com. The Flinchbaugh Forum, practical policy, bold ideas, and the conversations that move agriculture forward.
So, Chris, as you described that effort and that vision of CAST of looking at the broader ag sector, I'm reminded the policy education process that Mark described that we've lived in the ag economics and public policy education space is, in short, it was establish facts, destroy myths, respect values. So facts are critical to the equation.
Sure.
The science fundamentally matters, but it still fundamentally relies on people that have different values and opinions and perspectives and experiences and political priorities and goals and so forth. All of that is background to say, how does CAST produce something with scientific rigor and merit that contributes to a policy process where the decisions in the debate are not necessarily consistent with the rational, factual deliberation of issues. And even for that sake, when you identify an issue and produce a project, a paper, a product on it, you're working with scientists that may come from the hard sciences or physical sciences, where the scientific method has historically taught us identify the problem, establish the hypothesis, do the research, test it, find the conclusion, and then explain the answer. And yet the policy process doesn't have that simple problem, solution, answer sort of definition to it. How does CAST have to work with scientists who might have that traditional perspective that we have solved the problem if only you will read what we wrote and do what we say? How does CAST produce a publication that contributes without becoming sort of preachy in that sense?
Right on. That's a great question. So when CAST produces something, it does so with a pretty big network of volunteers, not only authors or contributors, whatever that product may look like, but also reviewers for some of its material. And that cohort of individuals, as we might call them, that works on that thing, all have a pretty solid understanding of what we're trying to produce in the end, which is not a product that you might see in the scientific literature. It's something that is geared to inform policymaking. And that requires utilizing folks who have communication skills in that space. We actually give out an award, the Borlaug CAST Communication Award. And now we've started 2 other awards, a Lifetime Achievement Award and a Science Communication Scholarship for other ends of the spectrum. That is, the youngest folks out there working in the domain get that Science Communication Scholarship or can apply for it. Those at the end of their career, the Lifetime Achievement. Right in the middle are your Borlaug CAST Communication Awards. And why do we do that? Because we want to recognize folks who can not only do excellent science or participate in the larger scientific industry, they might be leaders in some other way and not actually do the hardcore science, but they communicate it appropriately to the audiences that we try to reach. That is so absolutely fundamental. And sometimes we've even had organizations approach us and say, hey, have you thought about doing this sort of thing and talking about this topic? If you do so, can you make sure that you have scientists that can actually speak to the policymaking community? Which sounds harsh, but there's a realization out there that you always need to have the right communicators for the job. And we do that. We try very hard to find those people, not just people doing the science, people that can communicate the science. There's a lot of them out there. There really are. And that's really reassuring. And sometimes maybe that's not everybody working on a paper. It might only be 1 or 2 of the folks. And those are the people we take to DC and we go and talk to the legislators with. We visit the offices. We roll out that paper to them. And we say, this is what we're talking about. Now, I want to come back to what I said earlier. Obviously, we live in a partisan climate. Whether it's more partisan or less partisan than it used to be, I'm not going to get into that debate, but it is partisan. And I think everybody recognizes that. CAST is very, very deliberate about being nonpartisan in its approach. And if our aim is to bring quality information, regardless of which side of the aisle is controlling which branch at the moment, it's not always easy. But we work hard to build bridges on both sides so that that resource is available to them and they realize that this is quality information that they can use. How they use it, I don't know. But I hope it informs the decisions that they make. And we stay true to that mission.
Yeah.
I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, certainly. You can't resolve political preferences or ideologies or differences, but you can certainly contribute science and fact to the debate.
Absolutely. One critical thing too that I'll say is when we recruit people and they get involved in the CAST process, we're very explicit on our mission and how we do things. And if you can't operate in that environment about being nonpartisan and science-based, unbiased, etc., then this is probably not a project for you to work on, right? So the folks who come into this environment and work with us are well aware that 1, they stay true to the CAST mission, and 2, there's an expectation that you're going to be a really good communicator. And they are, which I'm really happy about.
I have 2 related questions to piggyback on that, based on how you communicate science or policy, I guess, for us more in today's environment. Cherry picking and communicating uncertainty. So first of all, with cherry picking, I don't know any people who say they aren't pro-science,
Sure.
but perhaps sometimes it's pro-science within my interests or my value set.
Yep.
So how you think through that. And the other one has to do with uncertainty. I used to watch Call the Midwife, which showed how medical advances in post-war Britain were saving women's lives and children's lives. But then I remember once I think they were giving vaccinations using mercury. And so massive advances that save lives, but there's uncertainty. They didn't, some of the stuff wasn't great. So I'm curious how you address those, or at least keep those issues in mind when communicating.
I think a lot of scientists are very good at expressing uncertainty. There's not many of us in the scientific core that say, yep, I know the answer 100%, and this is going to be the truth forever. We know, from scientific method and from doing tests and statistics, you're like, well, there's always a chance that is not true and the total final solution. But we know what we know and we'll communicate what we do know. And I think that that's part and parcel of communicating and communicating well. Here's what we think. Here's the percentage of likelihood. We can all address that in some of our statistical techniques, but you don't want to say that way when you're talking to policymakers and break it down, error rate and all that ridiculousness. No one's going to listen to that. But just acknowledging the fact that you don't necessarily have the perfect solution 100% of the time that is going to be true forever and always. I think you have to go into this with some level of just realism and humility. And I think a lot of scientists do that. And we do that, I think, pretty well in our publications and our other ways of doing things. And I think you touched on something else that's important, and that is uncertainty and risk. The world is full of unrisk, and we try to de-risk things in some cases with science and technology and take risks away. You mentioned, vaccines and the like. You reduce a risk, but people would say you introduce another one. Sure, life is full of risk. And what risk are you willing to accept and what risk are you not? And I think that that's part of science as well. Just acknowledging that risks exist and there's maybe trade-offs. And I'm not pointing to a particular issue like vaccines by any means. I'm not an expert in that space. I'm just utilizing your example and saying they exist. And I think if CAS can utilize folks to write, to speak, who acknowledge those uncertainties and those risks, the message is not only better received, but it also, I think, builds trust in science. We shouldn't come at it and say, we've got all the answers. We know we're quote unquote experts. Trust us. Well, that's just not how society works, especially in a free society like ours with the free flow of information with other competing sources that exist, which is great because that's part of our national identity. But there are ways that I think we can address it. And I hope what I suggested is helpful.
Yeah, I was going to, for example, we have in the current political or policy debate, we have multiple groups that appear to be presenting their own source of facts that oftentimes don't agree.
Right, that happens.
And lead to factionalization or segments in our society that don't talk to each other, and a whole host of that raises issues about how strong our democracy is, and a number of things that get a little bit beyond the realm of being able to scientifically come up with a right solution. Maybe it's, again, alternatives that one group wants one alternative and another group wants another alternative, and they cite their own sets of facts. Do you run in oftentimes to those kinds of situations regarding when you present? How do you negotiate that kind of a circumstance? Particularly, I'm thinking about food and health and the whole area there, that where we're really seeing a lot of changes in terms of what various consumer segments want in our system.
Well, that's a great question. I don't think we have a lot of, you might say, hostile debates or conflicts with other groups out there who are presenting their facts as they see them as well. And maybe that's a problem for CAST. Maybe we should be engaging more with those groups. And as we do engage our audience, it doesn't seem like we have a lot of overlap with some of those groups. But I will say this, even when we work amongst ourselves with our volunteers, it's interesting to see the variety of opinions and perspectives based on the data they've gathered and the experiences that they had and how they think about the issue a little bit differently than maybe some others. I've run across this, and I'm not going to give a lot of details, but I've run across this recently with PFAS and that really hot button issue of the moment. It's interesting to hear people who come from, you might say, similar camps, but have different perspectives on this and have different data in front of their eyes. And you're a CAST, what happens is That gets internally and rigorously debated. And remember, too, as I said before, the materials we put out are reviewed. The reviewers will have their input as well. And I think that's more where we see some of this debate happening, so that by the time, hopefully, by the time our product gets put out, it's been pretty hard debate that's actually happened behind the scenes. Now, do those debates represent everybody out there working in that domain? No, they don't. And I wouldn't ever claim that. But I hope as we build this new mission, this bigger mission for CAST, quote unquote, a National Academy of Agriculture, that more individuals and organizations from those camps that we have historically not necessarily worked with real closely will come in to be part of it and be part of the discussion, because they need to be. That's the hope, and we'll see how that goes. But more to be built there for the future.
Well, we certainly wish you well in that broader vision.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And maybe there's some areas that the Flinchbaugh Center and other centers in the policy analysis realm can assist in that process and work towards a similar vision.
I agree. CAST is not looking to exclusively control this space or be the Uber organization overall. It's not meant to be that at all. Again, it's a big tent approach, and we hope to convene and coordinate and facilitate, and working with various centers is of importance to that. We welcome that. We don't shy away from it. It's a good model for the future. And if we're going to bring some strategic direction to U.S. agriculture, and particularly the science and tech domain in particular, it's going to take that sort of approach. So long, though, as it leads to action and impact. Not just conversing, not just chatting, not just convening, but driving towards action and impact appropriately. That's what we have got to be focused on. That's priority number one in the end.
I wanted to ask our namesake, Barry Flinchbaugh, was very good at using humor, and he was often quite provocative, indiscriminately provocative, I should say. Not just in one direction.
That may be the understatement of the year.
And I think that is relevant as ever in the attention economy that we have today. It might be especially hard for economists to do these things, so we really appreciate what he did. I think it's a similar challenge with science when you're communicating science, that there's a sort of a factual basis to it, but then you do have to engage in our current landscape. Are you thinking about how you capture people's attention? In today's media landscape, humor just isn't always possible.
Right.
Barry Flinchbaugh found a way to do it, but I'm curious how you think through that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think here at CAST, I'm particularly myself, trying to capture people's attention for the most part in the larger public, for example. We are really trying to reach a pretty specific audience at this junction in the organization. And to do that, I really think ideas and foresight are key. I'm talking about, we're talking about the future of U.S. agriculture and the whole science, technology, and regulatory apparatus. And what I'm finding is the subject is always of prime importance. After that, it's often the people delivering that really brings reputation and weight to what's being delivered. And we work really hard to get both of those things right. And if we can do it in a way, though, that is well communicated and trusted, we're meeting our mission. So how do we get their attention? I think it's by having the answer. We talked about this before, though, to the level of certainty that you can at the right time in a very, very timely fashion. That is what our focus is on. And that last part is tough. Being timely with your scientific information and communicate in a way that's valuable is pretty difficult. People are spread pretty thin already in our ag community, and I can certainly speak for the science and technology community in particular. But we have to be timely, and we have to be talking about the right things. And when you have the setup that we have with our various work groups, with our big volunteer network, we think we're set up to do those things. And by the way, CAST has migrated over time. We used to do almost exclusively papers. But we're finding things now like podcasts, like what we're working on right now, and webinars, particularly for our audience, such as congressional staffers, are super important because that's how they want to consume their information. And a lot of folks want to hear and see directly from the person. So that's how we can capture the attention too. And I'll say the last thing, you want to capture attention. This sounds simple, but when you offer everything free of charge and it's open information, you capture a lot broader audience and people are far more willing to tune in and really be engaged with you in discussion. That's an important piece of our mission. Our member organizations and our members in general make that mission possible and make the reach that we have possible. Without them, it'd be tougher to reach a broader audience.
Chris, before we let you go, briefly, how can folks find out more about the center and its work? You obviously have an online presence, so where do they go?
Yes, sir. Well, we do indeed have our website. Check it out. I think it's the easiest to search in your web browser for CAST agriculture. Just put in those search terms. I bet you land on our page first, CAST and agriculture. Otherwise, follow us on social media. We're on all the major social media plays out there. And I would request that if you're interested in chatting more, reach out to me via LinkedIn. You can look for Christopher or Chris Boomsma on LinkedIn. Just search me under CAST. Happy to connect, and we can have some more discussion.
Well, Chris, we definitely appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and give us your overview of CAST, its approach to its work, and its good work. And we hope to have a conversation with you again later on down the line, for this is a very fast-moving field, obviously. Thank you so much for joining us right here.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for your time.
And we'd like to thank our panel as well for joining us. Mark Edelman, Iowa State University, Brad Lubin of the University of Nebraska, and Jenny Ift of Kansas State University. Our guest has been Chris Boomsma. He is the CEO of the Center for Agricultural Science and Technology. That center is based at Ames, Iowa. We would remind you that you should check out that weekly podcast, Smoke and Mirrors, Ag Policy Unfiltered, hosted by Jenny. Simply search for it by name online. And we'd also remind you to feel free and go back and listen to our previous Clearing the Air podcasts. Those are housed at flinchbaughcenter.com, along with a wealth of other worthwhile features, flinchbaughcenter.com. We thank you, as always, for tuning in, and we will be back next month. Hope you will be as well for another round on matters of agricultural policy. From Kansas State University, Eric Atkinson here. Have a good day. The 2026 Flinchbaugh Forum is coming up September the 3rd and the 4th, and we're inviting partners who want to help shape the future of food and agriculture. If your organization values practical policy conversations, industry leadership, and visibility with decision makers across the ag economy, this is the place to invest. Reach out today at www.flinchbaughcenter.com to explore sponsorship opportunities and join us in moving agricultural policy forward.